Okay. Hey, welcome everybody to the Energy Newsbeat podcast. My name is Stu Turley, President and CEO of the Sandstone Group. And we got a special treat today. We've got a guest extraordinaire. We got the Ben Samuels. I'd like to read his resume here, and I'm going to show our folks on YouTube. It's like a pedigree. Ben is the pedigree. Ben Samuels, welcome, and thank you for stopping by the podcast.
Absolutely, Stu. Looking forward to a conversation today. Really appreciate you having me on. I know that you and I have been connected for quite some time and have enjoyed some banter across a number of different social media platforms, and I'm looking forward to the show today. It's going to be good.
I gotta tell folks, you're a podcast extraordinaire video host, and you had trouble technology-wise just getting on the show. I'm sorry, I gotta brag. We were like talking smack on you before you even started.
It happens, blame Zoom, blame Apple, one of those. It couldn't be me, right? There's no way. No.
No, is that toilet paper on the top of your desk? What is that?
Paper towels. Yeah, I was cleaning for you, Stu. I was doing a little bit of cleaning for you. I guess I should push it off camera.
I'm sorry. No. I want to tell my listeners as well. They all know Ryan Ray, and you and I talk smack. In fact, our tweets were going off crazy with our smack talk on Twitter, and so Ryan Ray is from Texas, and he can't pronounce well. He pronounces it whale. And one time, I want to share with my folks, one time you were interviewing Ryan, and his desk started coming up, and you had some music playing, and he froze. So his desk sucked all the powder out of Texas ERCOT system and just took the whole thing down. And you were really good. You just kind of went right on about your business.
Listen, Ryan's going to throw the curveballs all the time, whether he knows it or not. And so, yeah, if you're going to be on a podcast with Ryan, as you know, you got to be ready for anything. You got to be ready to take whatever comes at you.
Well, let's back up just a bit. Tell us a little bit about Ben Samuels. You're the president at Source Rock Midstream. Tell us what's going on there.
Yeah, so I've originally from Houston, been out in Midland for about 8 years now on the back of a post BA over at a small school in Colorado. Started my career in minerals out here and ran a fund for a couple of years. In the last couple of years, I've been more focused on the surface and the oil field water side of the the business. And so what Source Rock Midstream is focused on is we're on the water midstream side of the business. And we're running projects everywhere from saltwater disposal wells to water transfer and treatment. And we have a number we've got a number of assets in play here. The preeminent flagship property for us is up in Ackerley, Texas. For anyone not familiar with the Permian Basin, it's about an hour northeast of Midland. It's a very small town. We've got about 1,500 acres that we're currently developing, again, with some of that oil field water development. And it's a great time in the market in that space, in the sense that for years now, Stu, the oil and gas industry has. We've known that produced water was an issue. We've known that there needed to be a solution, but there didn't seem to be any major drivers to actually finding the solution and banking those problems and moving those into use case, into deployment. And so we really took the bull by the horns about 2 years ago is when we acquired this property, and we decided that we wanted to be sort of on the leading edge of that. And so we've pushed the needle there. We've had a number of pilot programs that have been facilitated, under us on the property, and been doing things of that nature, step by step, trying to make a foothold. And really, I think we're on the cusp of the produced water business changing model, maybe not a 90 degree shift, but shifting diametrically comparative to what it's been in the last 20 years. And I think we're Source Rock is in a really good spot to be part of that conversation.
Man, and now everything you led right up to it, but you left the word ESG out, and taking care of the water and everything else. Tell us a little bit about Source Rock and ESG, because you're right up in there with that.
No, it's a great question, Stu. And I'll be honest with you. One of the things that I struggle with right now as the proprietor and owner of this entity is that conversation. I'll try to make it brief for us here. When you talk,
brief.
Yeah, I know. Right, exactly. Believe me, I know. When I think of and when I talk about ESG and when I think of the conversations that I'm having, at the end of the day, Stu, I think it has become more of a buzzword and more of a thing to put on an S1 and something to talk about to your stakeholders rather than something that is actually driving operational change. And because of that, I could sit here and tell you that we are, focused on ESG and that's our main core vision. But I think that's disingenuous in the sense that, the way that I come at this business and the way that I have framed SourceRock is that we are in a position to be a landowner advocate as a landowner of this property. Yes. We are in a position to drive the conversation in a way that actually results in tangible change on a ground level rather than just talking about it in my S1 that I file with the IRS. And so I think those are fundamental differences in the sense that what I'm telling you is that I'm trying to be about the action rather than about the talk. And so I've been to half a dozen or plus conferences in the last 18 months or 2 years that have basically the entire agenda was ESG. And by and large, the response from the crowd and the response from the groups was, until the federal government gives us grant dollars, why would we do that? Until it makes sense for the balance sheet, why are we going to do that? Unless the stakeholders demand that we need to do that, why are we going to do that? None of those reasons have anything to do with the preservation of the resource, the beneficial reuse of the resource. None of those things have to do with the actions taken. It's a capital driven conversation. And if you hear the frustration in my voice, it's because it is frustrating for someone from my seat to be in the industry in a position that I'm in these capital rooms, the capital groups. I've got really strong connections on the finance side, but I also have, tangible assets that are sitting out on property. And so I have the operator focus as well. And the dichotomy of those conversations is infuriating to a degree. So much so, I'll kind of out myself here because the crowd at this specific conference wasn't very big, but I think it was in September. If I have my timeline right, it was September. There was an oil field water connection conference in Dallas. And I went, and those conferences are fantastic. There was about 150 people in the room, give or take, and there was a panel discussion. And basically, we were talking about ESG, and I had a condensed question, but I basically framed what I just said now to you in a question of, is the industry going to continue to talk about this as though we actually care, even though what we're waiting for is, 45Q or some other sort of regulatory or tax incentive? Are we going to continue to talk about this, or does the industry actually care about creating solutions to the problem?
Yep.
And I'll tell you, Stu, there was a panel of 4 people. And I asked this question. I actually asked it twice over 2 days in different ways, 2 different panels. Every single person on the panel punted the question. They didn't even want to answer it. And here's the kicker. Here's the real kicker.
Right.
Again, I'm sort of outing myself. But on the panel, there were 7 total of the 2 panels. 3 of those 7 people I'd known previously, and so there was some sort of relationship, but 3 of the 7 pulled me aside afterwards or some sort on the side and been like, here's the real answer to your question. Here's what I would have said if I wasn't sitting in front of 150 people. And I think my problem here, Stu, and I'm putting myself out there, I guess, but I think my problem a lot of times is, if you can't, and I don't mean you, but if an operator can't sit in front of 150 industry professionals and give a candid, raw answer, when are you ever going to hear it?
Exactly. And I think there's a couple, you brought up about 17 good points, and I don't mean to compliment you because I know Ryan never does. But I don't believe that ESG, there's a couple things, and Ben, I'm going to rat myself out. I threw this at you and you got out of your chair physically. You got leaned forward, and I've watched enough of your stuff. You just started rolling. So I knew where your goat was tied up, and I just kind of went ding. Okay. So I don't feel that ESG should even be spoken without accountability. and you hit every single one of my hot buttons that you're real. And that you're taking it seriously. And I didn't know the aspect. If I did, I didn't remember, which is normal for me. And that is about your land ownership piece of it as well. And having the water is one of the most critical problems out there in the Permian. I mean, it is huge. And so this is really important when you take a look at that. And your cross between finance, ESG, and oil is huge.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm in an interesting position. Like I said, I mean, I think that going back to something you said early on in the show today, you know, I'm very much of, and I think this word sort of comes with some negative connotations sometimes, but I'm very much of a generalist. I try to stay pretty broad in my, you know, understanding of things and where I sit. And so by virtue of that, yeah, I've got, you know, really good understanding of what happens on the capital side. I do a lot of advisory on that. I've done transactional advisory, both on acquisition and divestiture, raising capital, selling businesses, buying businesses. I've been sort of at all those tables. And so I understand, you know, how all that works. And then, you know, on the other side, you know, we now own this asset, and I'm looking at it from the landowner and operations perspective. Something, you know, that we can talk about, you know, if you'd like to or not. But, you know, as a side passion, I guess I would say, you know, personally, I own about somewhere between 12 and 15,000 acres of surface, you know, across the country, in a number of different areas for a number of different reasons. But you know, the reason I bring that up is because, you know, raw land is something that I very, very fundamentally appreciate, value, and understand. And so I can sort of see it differently than most. And the reason, and I used my words carefully there a few minutes ago when I said landowner advocate. And what I mean by that is, especially out here in the Permian, Stu, I think that most of the oil and gas operators, a lot of them have this mentality of, I'm going to do what I want to do. And as long as I can write a check big enough, I can get it done. And I'll tell you, there have been a couple of times in the last 2 years, as the landowner of this Ackerley asset, of this surface asset that we have under Source Rock, that an operator has come to me with, hey, you know, so one of them I'll speak to specifically. We were approached by an operator that was looking to electrify a pad that was about a mile off of our property. And where we are logistically, we sit on the top of the city, and so we have the city power, we have the community power running directly through us. And so the operator came to us and basically said, hey, we want to build an overhead power line from here to here, and we want to pay you X. And the X was nominally more than right-of-way costs. Right. And so I very politely, long story short, I very politely was like, no, that's just not of interest. They continued to offer more and more, and eventually, you know, it came down to, it's just not going to happen. You know, if you want to go to my neighbor, if you want to go up the street, or you want to go around me, that's happened, but you're not going to get it from here. And I don't think they ever were able to get it done. And the reason I say it that way is because I think most landowners either wouldn't understand enough, and they would just sign it and just be like, oh, I'm getting X number of dollars. Cool. I'll take the check. And they wouldn't understand the value there. And the other side of that is that I think that the operators have become, I think they've become focused on, you know, we have to cut corners. And where's the easiest corner to cut? The easiest corner to cut is if you can get your land acquisition costs down. And I think at the end of the day, the landowner is by and large beholden to, you know, to that in a lot of ways, because like if you're the surface owner and you don't own your minerals, the operator, you know, if the operator can do a lot without your consent, without your say. And so I think the landowner in general has sort of been conditioned that, you know, I don't have control over this. I have to just take the money and you know, and so I've taken a different seat. And that's why I say that I'm looking at this from a very fundamentally different perspective.
So as a landowner, we know that rigs, if a bad operator comes in, a bad operator is not ESG friendly, needless to say, but a bad operator can make a mess. And so is that what you were going after by not giving them a right of way and access on that? Do you know the operator?
I do. And so specifically to this, you know, specific proposal, the reason that we weren't comfortable with the proposal is because the overhead power line was going to be running over the property in an area that we are not currently developing, but is a prime piece of property. And we were not sure about the potential implications of having that power line over the property. And so it was simply an unknown, unquantifiable risk that we decided that
which makes sense.
It wasn't worth putting together. And so, and if the power line had been on like a different part of the property or something else, it may have made sense. But given what we're trying to do here on this acreage, it just wasn't for the amount of money that we were talking about.
Okay, that's great, because that was not a Ryan Ray request, because Ryan, you just say no, and but this was more of a business request, and I'd say no just to have some fun with Ryan, especially when he was trying to cook some of those steaks that looked like a foot. Good grief!
I tell Ryan all the time. I tell Ryan no all the time, just to hear his response. So I'm with you.
Oh, he squeaks. I mean, it is so fun to hear him squeak. And you have this unconditional love for him to be able to go, you whack like a whack-a-mole. He pops up over here and you whack him again, and everything. So anyway, if anybody doesn't get to see you two bounce around, and then I have so much fun popping in and just being a squirrel, especially on Ryan's kind of stuff, and just being a stupid idiot on live. I'm hammering away, and Ryan, I saw him the other day, Ben, he goes, "Stew's on again." So anyway, back to this and everything else. Your experience in this, you also bring up so many social kind of things in your stuff. You're not just oil and gas. Tell me about how did you spin off from Source Rock Water, being knowledgeable in finance and oil, and then you're off, and I'm sitting there. I caught you guys a while ago on this, and I was like, that ain't oil and gas. Where are you going with this?
Absolutely, yeah. Going back to something I said a couple seconds ago, I'm very much more of a generalist, more of somewhat of a Renaissance man, in the sense that I've got a really broad interest base. I was born into a very entrepreneurial, go get them, free thinking family, and so that model was taught to me from a very, very young age. And so that that ability to think critically and synthesize information quickly and those sort of things were skills that I just sort of picked up innately from my childhood and my family. And so super fortunate from that perspective. In response to some of the specifics, the political and sort of the geopolitical interests, Stu, it really, at the end of the day, it comes from, I'll make it very simple. It comes from, culturally and my background, I'm Jewish on both sides of my family tree. And as we know, the Jews went through the Holocaust in the 40s. And I've done a lot of research around that time and around sort of the preceding years and what led up to it. And one of the things that I have been fascinated by since really childhood, when I really started to learn about the Holocaust, is what's called the bystander effect. And what the bystander effect is, in brief, is in that context of 1930s Germany, there were millions of people in Germany at the time that had no real stake in defending the Jews or doing anything to fix the problem, and so they were just sort of bystanding and watching it happen. And there's no there's no compulsive nature to if you see something, right, you must act, right? And so there was this bystander effect of, oh, it's not that bad, or oh, maybe they've done something to deserve it, or those sort of things. And then the Holocaust transpired, and I'm a firm believer that if there had been some forethought of what are we seeing in the preamble to the Holocaust, maybe we should shut this down, that maybe the problem wouldn't have been as bad. And I know that's a really aggressive example, so let me reframe.
No, but it's factual, Ben. It's factual.
Right. Well, it is, but and the reason I say reframe it is because if we look at where we are today, I firmly believe that my duty as an American is to be in the know of what's going on, be aware of what my government is trying to do, and be a voice of what I consider to be reason. And the reason I say it that way is because there's a lot of things that let me back up for a second. My thesis on government, especially in this country, is I want a federal government that protects my international borders and builds roads and infrastructure, and basically everything else is left to the states, and the states do a very, very little, and then everything else is left to the individual. That's sort of my ethos when I think about politics. Right. And so the shift that we have seen, towards, now, you're having people that are educated academics on Twitter being deplatformed because speaking to facts. You have people across the spectrum being deplatformed or cancel culture because they're not speaking to what the powers that be want them to be speaking to. And I think that's a really dangerous dynamic. And do I think that I don't know, Stu, what a 2020s, 2030s World War III looks like. I don't know what that sort of new iteration of a world war is. But I'm firm belief that you see it globally. It's not just in America. The people of the world have become aware that the governments are playing an end game that I don't think the people are okay with. And I think that unfortunately, what I see by and large, the people in this country that understand the problems and understand the dangers are generally the intellectuals. And here's the problem. Generally, those folks generally decide, I can't be bothered with that because that's going to mess with my mental sanity, and I decide to ignore it, and I don't have control over that, and so you sort of take a hands-off approach of I can't really engage, and when you do that, what happens is the politicians just get to take all they get to put their hand in the honeypot and take all the take that away from you. And so I think it's an important perspective and dynamic in America that we need to. I'm a firm believer that we need to be protecting our freedoms from the government. That the government has put themselves on the other side of the aisle from the populace, and I want to speak to that. And that's that's what it comes down to.
Oh yeah, and I love your thought process. I'm also a big advocate for. There's a couple people in the world. I got about 16 thoughts again because of everything you just said. There are people that will get involved, and there are people that will not. And if you haven't been in the situation where life is on the line, or people are doing harm to anybody, and you don't step in, either you don't know how, or you're not even processing what's going on. But I have been there, and that's a good pun, been there. And you sit back and go, wait a minute, that person's getting harmed by somebody else. I have stepped in multiple times. I am not a guy to sit on the sideline when somebody is being racially profiled, religious profiled. I don't care who you are. If you're a human being, that's the number one person. If you're a human, you deserve to be, regardless of race, creed, color, anything else. And I've been there. What you just said is phenomenal, especially from a government standpoint. And you also said something else. There's a great awakening happening. I've been watching around the world. People are tired of governments hiding stuff. I think there's a great awakening coming.
I think so too. And like I said, I don't really know what that new world version looks like, because in the last time we had a world war and the one before that, we lived in a fundamentally different world in terms of capabilities and et cetera, right? And so I don't know what that necessarily looks like. But I think it's really important that we're aware that while we have freedoms in this country, I think we have seen the last 24 months that those freedoms can be taken away at the whim of the government whenever they decide. And the most impactful thing that I've picked up in the last 2 years, and this might sound a little bit aggressive, but I think the most impactful thing that I've picked up is in America, when the government says jump, there's a lot of people in this country that will jump without question, without thought, and they will just jump. And I think that's really dangerous. I think that as Americans, if the government says jump, our duty is to say why, or you don't have the right to tell me to do that, or we do not live in a country where we have to prescribe. We don't live in North Korea. We don't live in China. We don't live in a country where we have to prescribe to those things. And I think what I'm saying is I think there's let me say it this way. I think there's very peaceful ways to get to what I'm talking about. I'm not espousing violent or civil, I'm not talking about because I mean, during the riots and all the crap that was happening last year, I mean, I was firmly on the clearly on the anti side of that, and so I think there's appropriate ways to do this. But I think that I think we're walking into a scenario in a world where there's enough of this country, and these midterms are going to be really interesting because I think there's enough of this country that has woken up to that dynamic, and it's going to be really interesting to see what happens in the next 2 years.
Oh, absolutely. And buckle up, get a flight suit on because it's going to be some entertainment. And I do like the way you're going with this. And I also want to take it one step further. I thoroughly enjoy visiting with people from Hindu, Buddhist, from Muslim, Jewish. I love talking theology, no matter what religion you are. And I love talking about those kind of things. You can't discriminate based on opinions or religion. You can discriminate based on stupidity. So I think that is, it should be, age, you can't discriminate, but you can discriminate based on stupidity. So sorry.
It's interesting you say that because, so what I would say in response there is one of the things that the left has done to some degree of success, I guess, is they have made it so that there's a right answer to questions now. There's a right thing to think. Right. There's a right thing to say. There's a right and wrong way to live. And I think that's really dangerous. And so when you say something about stupidity, I think that the danger there is that people that, as an example, there are some people that believe that ivermectin should be able to be used as medicine, or like if I want to take ivermectin for COVID, I should be able to do that. And someone on the left would call that very stupid. Now, is that stupid? I don't know. It comes down to how you define the word, right? And so when you say you can discriminate based on stupidity, unfortunately, I think the left is reporting that they're doing that, right? Because if I decided that I
hadn't thought of it that way from either side. You can discriminate based on stupidity depending on your outlook. I am an idiot. Hey, great point, Ben.
I mean, the subjectiveness of that whole dynamic is, you can paint the other side however you want, right?
Oh my goodness, I'm an idiot. I'm going to go just, hit my head with a hammer here in a minute. That was a great point, man. Ouch. Truth hurts, man. But why can't we talk about things? That's what I enjoy, is having the discussions on religion, understanding why things happen, and having a great world discussion. I think Americans are very one-sided. We don't have multiple language. You visit from folks from Europe, they know 4 or 5 languages. I had the pleasure of interviewing Irina Vaslav from Bulgaria, and she's, a very well-known energy expert. Thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. And I have to tell you, I did a Putin imitation, a very bad one with her. And she goes, Putin's a very nice man, and your imitation is very bad. So, I'm a lousy Putin imitation, but Americans don't have the international understanding. We need to understand more.
We as Americans, and Stu, you've got me. Usually, this is a different corner than I usually sit in. But Americans, I think we have developed the audacity to believe that we are the best at everything, the best in everything, and we lead the world in such an aggressive manner that we don't need to interface with the rest of it. And what I mean by that is, if you live in, I'll use your example. If you live in Russia and if you're one of the people that is not, subscribed to the machine, and you're trying to make a better life for yourself, right? You're going to learn English. Like you're going to know English probably better than most Americans. Exactly. Not only that, though, in the curriculum, and I dated I had a girlfriend for a number of years, a few years back, and she was born in Moscow, lived in Russia until she was 22, and then moved to the States to come to school here. And so she lived in sort of both arenas for a while. And she, to your point, she was fluent in 4 languages, but they not only have to learn English in school, they have to learn another language. So they know Russian, obviously. They have to learn English, and they are mandatory. They have to learn a third one. And in this country, most of the time, if you graduate college with a loose understanding of English, like that's the win.
I still can't spell. So, and your point is well taken on that.
Neither can Ryan. It's okay.
Ooh, smackdown. Now I did graduate from Oklahoma State University, so I do have that going against me. So, but Ryan, Ryan, I got Ryan on the brain. Ben, you can just, leave this podcast right now, and I apologize. But when we talk about, we've really kind of wrapped around the energy. We wrapped around how important energy is to social. And now we're going to come back into this energy crisis. We only have about another 5 minutes, and I know you've got a tremendously busy schedule. And I'm so grateful for your time. But we've had the energy. We've had the ESG. We're in an energy crisis right now. And COP26, they said, oh, by the way, natural gas and nuclear are now green. And so it's now available for funding. And then the infrastructure bill had very quietly put in there that natural gas is available for funding under the infrastructure bill. And I'm like, hey, is anybody else in the world seeing that they're sneaking the narrative in there because the renewable side has failed and has caused, it's one of the primary reasons that we're having inflation. It's one of the primary reasons that the cost of kilowatt per hour has gone up because of the bad energy policies. Where I'm going with this is, what is the Ben Samuels thought process for energy coming around in 2022? Put your, I hate to say, I like your outlook on life and things going on. What's your crystal ball for energy and oil and gas for 2022?
So, in the next 12 months, I think it's a really interesting 12 months in the sense that we've got a lot of sort of outside factors that I think are going to dominate that conversation. I think one of the things that people are not talking much about, but I do think it's going to have a big difference and a big impact, I should say, just because of the way, the seat that Texas has is, the railroad commissioner seat elections that are up this year. And if that were to fundamentally change the dynamic of that board, that the Railroad Commission in Texas has an unbelievable amount of power. I don't think that people realize how much power that entity really does have. And if the makeup of that board changes, I think that could have national implications on a massive scale.
Wow.
And so that's something I'm looking at very closely. But the reason I also say that we're in an interesting time is because we're in a midterms year. We're in a year where both sides of the aisle are even more incentivized to maintain their base, to accrete power, to put put things on the floor that their constituents like, all of those things. And so, when you talk about some of the things that came out of COP26 and some of the a lot of that, Stu, I would tell you, is virtue signaling. A lot of that is placating the voter base. A lot of that is trying to signal one thing, and then once you have your seat in power, then you do something else. I think there's a lot of that going on. In regards to nuclear and natural gas and the renewables, I'm a firm believer that I don't know if it's going to be in the next 12 months, but in the coming years, we are going to have to find an equitable energy balance in this country. And that means hydro, solar, wind, nuclear, natural gas, oil, like everything, it should be available.
Use them all.
Use it all to the best of its efficiency. And the dynamic that we have right now with the unbelievable amount of preferential treatment that the renewables are getting over some of these other lower cost, I think that what that does is that artificially changes the market. And if you have developers building a wind farm purely because of the tax credits, that doesn't help anybody. That doesn't help anybody. And so I think that what we're going to find is what we're going to see in the next 12 months. I think we're going to see more of the conversation. Look, Germany is in a world of hurt right now. This winter is going to be brutal. There's places in the northeast of this country, in America, that I think are going to wake up in the next 6 months and realize that their governments have put their own lives at risk of. I think there's major problems sort of on the cusp here, and once once we go through this winter, I think that there's going to be a renewed sense of alarm and attention on this from a constituent level, where, when the next municipality that's not like in Southern California, but when the next municipality somewhere in the middle of the country says we're going to deplatform natural gas, you can't new build natural gas. I think that community is going to be like, no, that's not going to happen. And so I think those sort of things are, may start to percolate. I don't think it's going to happen in your timeline. I think that, the 12 months, that's a pretty short timeline, right? But I think that we're going to start to see sort of the conversation move that direction. And I think that may come to a precipice closer to like the 2024 presidential election. I think that, between now and then, because, if we look at what Biden is trying to put together with the energy infrastructure bill and all the stuff that they're doing, if they accomplish a lot of that, when 2024 comes around, we may be in a situation where it's, for the sake of saving the country's energy infrastructure, we have to make a different decision rather than, some of these other, sort of virtue signaling things that are floating around.
Nice. I'll tell you, I almost don't like doing a podcast with you. And the reason is you start bringing out, and take this the right way, you start bringing out all these kind of points, and it throws me for a whole loop, because now you're hitting on all these kind of like important topics, and you tease me with all these in my brain. I ADD and I go that way. But I'm going to have you back. And if you don't mind, I really do want to have you back, Ben, because this to me was absolutely so much fun. And I really respect you, all of your Energizer Bunny work that you do out there. And I like your stance. So thank you very much for coming on. I'm going to give you the last word. Give me a Ben thought for the day.
I love that. Well, Stu, first of all, let me thank you, for having me on. I really appreciate that, the kind words, and hopefully, you'll have me on before you have Ryan on again.
Absolutely, because we got to. He's like fighting an unarmed opponent anyway. So,
but a thought for the day. That's an interesting one. One of the things that I've been working on of recent is, so for the last few years, I've been focused on my LinkedIn presence and really building that platform, building that network. And that's been a really main thrust of mine. As you probably saw recently, I've been focusing a lot more on Twitter and putting that out. And so one of the thoughts that I would put out there is, in that iteration, in that iterative process, one of the things that I've noticed is, in brief, on LinkedIn, most of that community, I think, has sort of turned into very virtue signaling and look at me and the selfies, and there's not a lot of core, really good, granular, really good conversation. On Twitter, it's very different. The Twitter ecosystem is very much driven towards adding value and providing good quality content. And the reason I bring that up when you ask me that question is, I think the thought of the day is, find what you're passionate about, figure out why you're passionate about it, and start to speak that out into the world, and really exciting things happen. I'm nice at my core, I'm a pretty introverted person. I don't really need a lot of externalities or external motivation or interaction to be happy and to be fulfilled. And so one of the ways that I've sort of reverse engineered that is becoming more of a social media presence and leaning into that. I think that everybody sort of can find their tribe. It doesn't you don't need to be a Ryan Ray who just grips it and rips it to find your lane. But there's so much available out there that get a part of the conversation in one way or the other. Like I said, find what you're passionate about and find your tribe.
Ben, outstanding closing. I give you a hug, but man, it's COVID. So hey, thank you, Ben, and we will see everybody next time.
Sounds good. Thanks, Steve.